All right. Thank you all for joining me and my colleagues here on the preferred lender list, the smart choice for your students. My name is Will McGinley, and I'm joined by Laura Worley and Amanda Snyder from the Keystone Student Loan Team. So happy to have you here. Again, Laura Worley is manning the chat. So if you do have any questions along the way, please feel free to utilize that. I am actually going to go off camera here for just a little bit. And again, if you have any questions, please use that chat function.
Well, real quick, I'm sorry, this is Amanda. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, a quick second.
There we go.
All
Got
right,
it. Thank you.
perfect. All right. For those of you who don't know, Keystone Student Loans is actually a part of PHEAA. And it's interesting. I started in higher education about 2 decades ago. Working in financial aid offices, and I never thought that I'd be out of an office. But when the opportunity opened up at PHEAA, they had a mission that I thought I could get behind. And so basically, the mission here at PHEAA is to provide affordable access to higher education. We do that through grants and scholarships, but really, I mean, it really starts with trying to help students and families navigate that financial aid process. And so we start with financial literacy and build everything from there. Now, as we go forward through today, we have to understand that every situation is unique. This is one of those things whether it be a student and family and their unique situation, or a school and institution trying to figure out their next steps as far as preferred lender lists. Every situation is unique, and so what we're going to do is we're going to try to hit on the high level, kind of overview stuff. But if you do have specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So if you have specific questions that we could hopefully help answer, we'll have that there. And then again, as you go through, have questions, throw it in the chat. What we're hoping to cover today is understanding today's evolving landscape, particularly with OB3, clarify regulatory guidance for loan lists, dispel any myths around lender lists compliance, learn actionable strategies for compliant lender list creation, and then reframe lender lists as a student advocacy tool. Because after all, we're here to help our students. So I'm sure that many of you have been hearing about OB3 and everything that's been going on there. To kind of summarize this, the landscape is changing in higher education. The last time that this really had a big shift like this was back in, the 2008, 2009 timeframe, when direct lending ended up coming to the forefront of all lending strategies. So this is just kind of one of those things where students and families, even if they've been through this before, are now facing, new and evolving, loan limits, loan options, all these different things that are out there. So this is something that we really want to be able to help navigate students and families through as we go forward. Now, looking at some of the big changes that have happened recently, for the upcoming year, we're going to end up looking at, the Parent Plus loan being capped annually per child, having a lifetime limit for the first time, looking at the proration, not just for the last semester of a student's, educational career, but for every time that they drop below and end up going to that part-time status. Looking at grad students, the complete elimination for new borrowers. So again, they have a 3-year phase out, but this is one of those things where as new students are coming in, they are going to only be eligible for, their unsubsidized loans, and then looking at private education loans. So looking at the unsub graduate students, you have a lower lifetime limit there at 100,000, unless you are categorized as a professional student, which bumps up to 200,000. We have a new total borrowing limit of 257.5. So all these are changes that are happening and rolling out over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. But it's kind of one of those things where students and families are really dealing with a lot of change and a lot of turmoil. So a quick reality check, talking about the turmoil, talking about the change. Many students and parents lack financial literacy when it comes to higher education. Not saying that they can't manage a budget or anything like that, but it's similar to me. My wife is a realtor. Okay. So it's similar to me to like real estate. If you're buying a house, you like to think that you kind of got stuff together, but you only do this once, twice, maybe 3 times in your entire life. And so you try to rely on somebody that is more knowledgeable and has a little more information under the belt, rather than hoping and believing that you can end up navigating all this. Um, so what ends up happening is you kind of throw someone into this new situation where there's a ton of different choices that are out there. Students and families are getting overwhelmed by all these different choices and things that they're looking up. And there's actually something called choice paralysis, where you actually have so many choices that are out there that you actually don't know where to go or what to do. So it's up to schools, trusted allies, like a real estate agent. A realtor might provide you with trusted contractors, inspectors, or even lenders. But it's up to these schools to basically say, hey, we have vetted these lenders. We believe in these lenders. We've used these lenders in the past. Here are some that we trust. And so in that similar vein, like that's the position that our schools are currently in, is that we are that bridge between, someone that is trying to figure out how to better themselves and better themselves through education, but also being overwhelmed by all this information that's out there. Being in a financial aid office for a long time, I used to always say that financial aid was kind of like speaking another language. And it really is. There's so many acronyms, there's so many different things that are out there, so many new things that seem like they're just close enough to something you would understand that aren't quite the same. And that's where I really feel like having these lender lists and mastering these lender lists is something that you can end up utilizing and really kind of push that forward. Now, give me a little bit of background on the lender list, situation. So, right as I was getting into higher education, as far as working in an office, 2007, 2008, Andrew Cuomo, who was the Attorney General up in New York, launched a national investigation looking into basically some bad apples in the lending and school industry, and the higher education industry. And he found a few. This wasn't a wide sweeping thing. This was a few, but it was enough to make some changes. So starting in 2008, they put forth the Higher Education Opportunity Act, and it really kind of shifted how higher education, schools and colleges, universities, interacted with lenders. And basically, they put up a lot of guide rails, a lot of red tape in order to make sure that make sure that students weren't being taken advantage of. So the perception coming out of that, and again, this is what I walked into the first time I was ever in an office, was that, recommending lenders was a conflict of interest. I now look at it in a slightly different, slightly different view, but basically what they did is they put up those guide rails to enable ethical, compliant lender guidance. And so what that act actually did was it outlined how schools can build and disclose their lender lists. So it says that you can end up having a preferred lender list, that it must meet clear compliance standards, and that they're designed to empower, not restrict, institutions in creating financial wellness for students and families. Now, when looking at this, there's some basic things that you end up having to have. There should be at least three unaffiliated lenders. That means three lenders that are not from the school. Clearly defined selection criteria. So again, we're going to go into kind of what some of those are, but basically you have to have a process that you're doing this. You have to include that that the student can use any lender that's out there, that these are just purely a recommendation. These are ones we've worked with in the past. These are ones that we trust, but you can use any lender that you choose. And then they have to be reviewed. So, annual review of lender terms and services, and no revenue sharing or perks. Again, those are the guide rails that help drive a lot of what we're looking at here. So the benefits of creating a preferred lender list. So the big thing here is, you want to focus on the student outcomes, right? And so what this does is this empowers student decision making and promotes financial wellness. Uh, when you end up promoting financial wellness and you have a student that's borrowing through a better lender with better terms, you can end up saying, hey, from a reason for them to stop out, at least finances won't be one of them. That's kind of one of those things where when you are trying to figure out how to, increase persistence and retention year after year, you want to make sure that whoever they're borrowing with or whatever they're doing are not actually putting them in a financial disadvantage. And so when you end up going through a lender list and things like that, that's where you can kind of start to see this is where, the better lenders are going to start to differentiate themselves. You can start looking at those types of things, the different offerings as far as financial literacy, those different things that are out there that help build more of a partnership, as far as from an educational success standpoint. That's what you're looking for. it encourages comparison by transparency. Again, making it an apples comparison, reduces misinformation and delays. It enhances compliance and institutional integrity because again, you have certain guide rails that you have to follow. And it should align with your mission, which is equitable access to education. I think whether you're a student, parent, or a school, I think equitable access to education, making sure that everyone has that opportunity to end up going, is a big thing. Now, not every school is going to be within your price range, and sometimes you're going to have to borrow wisely. But again, this is one of those things where at least you have the options that are out there, so you're actually going out into it with your eyes wide open. Now, when looking at a historical versus preferred lender lists, I'll tell you I've worked at three different schools over my 18 plus years in higher education, and I've always used a historical lender list. I always have. It always seemed easier. It always seemed like one of those things where, I'm just going to keep updating with all the schools, all the lenders that we use. I, looking back on that, I honestly feel like I've done a disservice. Because you really don't have any vetting or evaluation criteria other than other people have used it. Shop around and see if that one works for you. Our lender list would end up growing to dozens upon dozens of different lenders that are out there. And, even though, they've been used in the past, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're even good lenders because it's one of those things where, people can be shopping around anywhere really. And if they end up, being able to process an educational loan, they could end up on your list. And it makes it seem like you're almost, recommending that to students and families. And that's why, in my current kind of situation, when looking back, I go back to, the fact that my wife was a realtor. Like she has 3 to 5 lenders on her list that she trusts because she has had good experiences with them. She knows that they offer good rates. She knows that this particular lender is really good for this particular type of situation. And so when a school is kind of going through this, limiting it to under a dozen or, over three, less than 12, something like that, where it's not dozens upon dozens, but, the school has actually vetted this and actively selected these lenders, you know, that they've actually disclosed all the different criteria that they've ended up utilizing to look at these lenders. And this is one of those things where, again, less is more in this situation. If a school is recommending these, 5 to 8 lenders because they trust them, it's a worthwhile endorsement at that point. It's not saying you have to use them, but it's saying that, what, these lenders actually meet the criteria that we believe in to help with student success. And so that's why I honestly feel like, someone who, again, historically has used a historical list, I think that a preferred lender list is really where you want to end up being, as far as from a school standpoint. And I do believe that with OB3 going on, there will be an influx of preferred lender lists that are going to be coming out, not just historical lists. And I think that is really going to help benefit the students and families. So dispelling some common misconceptions. Some of these, again, stem back from the 2008 time period where, you know, there was a lot of confusion around what was allowed and what wasn't. The fact that it isn't allowed, well, it is. It's actually encouraged under the Higher Education Act. So it's one of those things where that's something to make sure you completely dispel that. It puts you at legal risk. Actually, it's the opposite. It has compliance that actually protects you. The fact that it favors lenders, it actually supports students because you are looking at, getting cutting through all the fluff and getting to the meat of the importance and the good lenders that are out there that you can actually say in good conscience recommend. The fact that students won't use it, I actually disagree with that. When I was a director of financial aid, we used to my loan staff used to actually just encourage students to say, hey, we don't actually recommend any, but go out and look at our list. It's one of those things where now you can say, hey, you know what? This is something that I know our students actually rely on. This is something that our staff encourages them to do. And then, looking at it as far as it's too difficult to manage for the schools that are out there, it's not really as bad as you think. What an actual lender list looks like is you have transparent criteria. So yeah, you regularly update that information with current regular updates with current information. Most of the time it's going to be publicly accessible on your webpage. It's going to help support wise decisions as far as borrowing. How do you build it? You need to figure out who's going to be involved in the process. Then you need to defining your selection metrics and decide where to display it. Again, most of the time it's going to be on your loans page out there. Now, then at that point, you're going to say, all right, I need to vet and actually select these lenders. And again, you do that annually and make sure that you're publishing everything that's out there as far as all your disclosures and everything like that. Looking at some of the requirements that are out there, you need to make sure that you're posting and asking for the rates, fees, and repayment terms, disbursement and application process, looking at customer service and borrower satisfaction and any historical performance and default rates or default management that they end up utilizing. If you're trying to dig in deeper than that, sometimes you're going to be looking for eligibility for like past due balances, less than half-time status, SAP requirements, a cosigner release, or any support for international or DACA students. Some sample RFI questions again goes back to the fixed interest rates or versus variable. For me personally, I'm always been a fixed fan because it allows me to plan a little bit better. But everybody's different. Everybody's situation is different. Everybody has a different risk tolerance. But again, for me, fixed allows me just to plan a little bit better year in and year out. You can ask whether or not you support non-traditional students like part-time or certificate programs. Something that I'll touch on in just a bit, but PHEAA's loans actually check a lot of these boxes. The fact that whether or not so the first time I took out a mortgage, I was talking about do you sell your loans? We took out our mortgage with one company, and then they ended up selling it to like three different companies after that. And I got so confused by that process because, growing up, I didn't realize that that was something that was done. I thought once you had a loan with a company, but what it does is, it's just kind of one of those things where being able to have that lender that keeps and that is your contact, that is your touch point, that makes everything feel a lot more secure. At least it did for me. Um, and so that's just something again you can end up asking that as far as your questions on your evaluation process because again that was something that was important to me just from that stability standpoint. Again looking at the variable versus fixed, I'm more conservative, and that's just something that is good for me. But then also looking at the default strategy, default prevention strategies, looking if you're going to be more student focused as far as the student centered considerations. How quickly can students receive a credit decision? Do you support mobile apps? Do you offer any financial literacy or counseling beyond that? As I mentioned, PHEAA does offer undergraduate and graduate loans. We have low cost fixed interest rates, zero fees. You can end up being in a certificate program, or you can end up being in a grad school. There's everything in between. As long as that school is Title IV eligible, you can basically end up, trying to apply for one of these loans. We do have some interesting things that also go along with that that not everyone has, such as an interest rate reduction for graduating and an interest rate reduction for direct debit approval. I mean, it's just paying online. There's no prepayment penalty because again, we're trying to make higher education more affordable. And you know, this is one of those things where, again, I wouldn't have made the switch to FIA unless I believed in what we were doing. And so, when I was a director of financial aid, this was the type of loan that I would always try to figure out, how do I get this for our students? I didn't even know that this loan existed when I was back there. But like the fact that if you end up running into some academic troubles midway through a semester, and so you have a prior balance, and so you can't enroll for the future semester. This is something you can end up paying that off, not have to worry about academic progress per se from a school standpoint, because that's not a requirement with the loan. And so you can end up getting that and end up, getting back on track. And this is one of those things where, again, it is a quality service to be able to provide. We also offer parent loans. So something that, as far as a preferred lender list, you may be on the preferred list for an undergraduate loan, but not on there for a parent. Or you may be on there for a parent, but not for a grad loan. So that's one of those things where, again, every school is going to have to make their own unique decisions on whether or not they want to include, if they're approved from the undergrad or they approved all the way through. Are they, just approved from the undergrad, but they don't have all the bells and whistles that we want for a graduate program? That's something you're going to have to end up deciding as a school. So when you're looking at how to display a lender list, you can either display internally on the school website. And again, that's just kind of one of those things where it could be a PDF or anything like that you can end up just having out there, which again, if you're willing to keep up with the PDF and the annual updates, that's great. I mean, it really is. Or you can look at a lender comparison platform like Elm Select or Fast Choice. That's what I always historically did, is I ended up using one of those. And that just streamlines the setup, ensures compliance and everything that's out there. It helps you to sort and filter. It supports real-time updates on lender-provided data feedback. It combines the institutional context with the external convenience of like a search engine. It really makes it a lot easier to do that comparison shopping. So why should your institution consider a private lender list now? Student lending is changing. I mean, it's changing quickly. I mean, it really is. It's again, this is the fastest and most dramatic that I've seen since that 2008, 2009 timeframe. And it's something that we need to make sure that we're on top of to help our students and families borrow wisely. Financial aid professionals are on those front lines, and they are that trusted advocate for those students. So to make sure that your staff are are ready to go, ready to help students, and understand what the lender criteria really are, so you can properly advise, confident and compliantly, and really be that leader for your students, to help lead them to kind of that financial success. And again, it's not like you are there is no reciprocity or anything like that with the lenders. So it's one of those things where you're recommending these because you are trying to be transparent, you're trying to be ethical, you're trying to put your best foot forward. And I believe that, with a preferred lender list, this is kind of one of those things where you can end up utilizing this to really, really give your students the best chance for success. The final takeaways today, lender lists are legal and beneficial. They are, and it's one of those great things that you can end up really being completely in compliance, completely serving your students, but also helping lead them in a way that is going to help benefit them in the long term. The compliance is clear and achievable. There are certain takeaways. Again, I went through that checklist. We have some sample questions out there. I know that other schools that I've worked with in the past have used buddy schools or, people that they've met through their associations and said, hey, can I borrow your lender list? I'd love to copy it. It doesn't have to be completely, you know, you know, of your own demise, of your own creation. This is one of those things where you can just really see, a colleague that you respect and end up utilizing their information, use their kind of list to gather the information. Uh, you know, Providing a list improves student outcomes because again, this is one of those things where it helps with retention and helps with persistence from semester to semester, year after year. And financially, offices can end up advising with confidence because you know that each of these lenders has been vetted. It's gone through the process. You've asked all the questions, you've gathered the data, and so anytime that you have that information, it helps you make more confident decisions. And so as you go forward, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, this was a quick 25-minute kind of stop out of your day. But if you have any questions on why you should do this or some of the questions that are out there, again, we've seen a lot of different questions that have come along, and been asked of us when it comes to lender lists. We'd be happy to help you there. Laura and Amanda are both on the call today. Kim wasn't able to be with us, but each of us, would be happy to help you figure all this out and, get to that next evolution of kind of assisting your students. So if you have any questions remaining, you can end up dropping those in the chat. If not, I'll wait a couple of minutes and we'll say goodbye for today. But again, it was a pleasure talking with you. I hope you guys have a great day. And yeah, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Happy to help.